Room237 as I continue my marathon of Italian horror and Giallo films. And I apologize for the lack of videos this weekend. I had a lot going on, but I wanted to at least get one out. And this is actually the last Giallo I have for the time being until more orders come in and until I get to my Argento films. And this is one that is actually from the Pre-Argento 1960s era. This one I've heard of, but didn't really know anything about. And it's a film by Tinto Brass, which is a name I've heard, but this is the only Giallo he ever did. And it's one of the more artistic ones. It kind of reminded me of like an Oliver Stone film in some ways. But it's 1967's Deadly Sweet, which is it was also released as I Am What I Am. And it's loosely based on a novel called The Paper Tomb, written by Sergio Donati. So, it came out in 1967 in Italy, 1969 in France, and stars Jean-Louis Trintignant. I always struggle with that name. Eva Allen. Both of them would go on to be in Death Laid an Egg the following year. Trintignant would be in So Sweet, So Perverse by Umberto Lenzi. Allen would go on to be in Death Smiles on a Murderer. It's also an appearance by Roberto Bisacco, if I pronounce that correctly, who played Stefano in Torso. Now, the music was by Armando Trovajoli, which there's not too much to say about the music. I did like the theme song, the Deadly Sweet theme song, which I can't place who it reminds me of, but it's a pretty decent song. The score, I can't really say too much about, but the cinematography was done by Silvano Ippoliti. And I mention that because there is a lot of crazy editing in this film. And actually, Tinto Brass normally used Bruno Barcarol, if I pronounce that correctly. But he had died recently up to that point. So he chose Ippoliti because he had like a similar style. And this movie is very and apparently the working title was Enigma, which kind of makes sense. Very vague for a Giallo film, since they're all enigmas to a certain extent. But yeah, this movie was very inspired by the pop art. That was, well, pop art as an aesthetic, but of the time. And there's a lot of 1960s in this. There's some scenes and some parts that really feels like a 1967 time machine. So if you love the 1960s, definitely check this out. But, you know, like there's a lot of, but, you know, Brass was also very interested in pop art. Like, so that's why there's a lot of split screen, but he doesn't just use split screen as like a way to build suspense like Brian De Palma would, is to make it look like a comic book, because he thought the characters were two-dimensional, so he tried to make them two-dimensional as in like a comic character, like how they would appear on a page. There's also a lot of editing, like it switches from color to black and white, which I'm sure a lot of people will come up with different theories as to artistic reasons as to why. I like that because Brass went on to say, no, it was because of a necessity. There were some scenes that needed more lighting than I could get, so the only way to get it was to shoot in black and white. So people can come up with all the theories they want. They're all wrong. I always like it when a director comes out and says, no, this is why, and it's a very simple reason. That's why I love David Lynch films. He says, no, there is no meaning to my movies. But the thing about this movie, this says 105 minutes. This is the Cult Epics DVD. I think there's a Blu-ray of it, but in Wikipedia it says 107. But either way, even with its neat editing, a lot of it I actually really liked. There could have been a lot of trimming on this to bring it closer to the 90-minute mark, because there are scenes that just go on, that really just feels like time filler. I mean, there's 2 chase scenes that go on forever. There's the scene towards the end when they're looking for sort of the main person of interest at this one club, and it just feels like forever. They're walking around and it's just showing everyone in the area. So in that regard, I could say there could have been a lot of trimming. Other than that, it's not a very engaging film. It does kind of, even when the story's being moved forward and something actually is happening, it's not that engaging. The performances were alright. I mean, I think I'm just gonna call him Jean-Louis because I always struggle with his last name. His character is Bernard. I'm just gonna call him that. He did well. Lynn did fine as Jane. Everyone did fine. There is some humor in this, almost like Three Stooges humor. I'll get to that. This is one of the bigger hit and misses movies, or Giallo that I've seen recently. And even though I like a lot of ideas that went into it, none of them really involved a story. I mean, it is kind of, here's a murder, oh, blackmail is involved, let's figure out who it is. It feels kind of, thematically and narratively, I'll say it feels kind of generic, but the editing and some of the ideas that they have in the film keeps it interesting enough. So, but it's definitely not amongst the worst or the best. It's kind of in that mid-range I've talked about a few times. But Jean-Louis plays, like I said, Bernard, who's a struggling actor. Originally, it was supposed to take place in Paris, but Brass moved it to London because he thought London represented the artistic movement and freedom and peace. He said of all the things that happened in London that didn't happen in Paris, the Beatles was one of them. And I think that does kind of fit the tone and atmosphere better. Oh, and this is also only in Italian, so I had to watch it with subtitles. But he's at this nightclub. He goes up to this one room where where the boss is, this guy Prescott, and he's dead. And there's a woman standing over him named Jane, who played by Lynn. Now, she says she didn't do it. He believes her, but he seems to really like her. And this is what I mean by, because when he's walking to that office in the hallway, it goes to black and white. Then when he's in the office, it goes back to color. When they run down the fire escape, black and white. When they get in the car, it's color. At first, I thought it was an artistic thing. I thought, okay, all outside is good. But no, that quickly changed. So, yeah, I had to take a lot of notes because there wasn't really a website with a plot outline. Not that I... Eventually, as I got into it, I realized, do I really even need to take notes? Because it is kind of your step-by-step kind of Giallo film. But they get back to his place. He says he likes her. He believes that she didn't do it. Oh, actually, the very first shot is Jane being led into this room to ID a body, which she says was her father. So move forward to Bernard's house. In Bernard's house, he's an actor, and his apartment is decorated with a bunch of pictures of Golden Age Hollywood comic characters like Batman. And she says that she feels his death wasn't an accident, and she thinks that guy Prescott was going to blackmail him with this picture, supposedly of her stepmother named Martha. So Bernard decides to go to Prescott's house, but there's two other guys there, one of which is named Jelly Roll, who kind of reminded me of Terry Jones on Monty Python when him and Palin play the gangsters. Like, be a shame if something were to happen to it. It reminds me of him. They beat him up because they're looking for a diary. But, oh god, this thing is always so slow. I really gotta get a new tablet. But, then there's like, and this is when I first started noticing the style of the film, because there is kind of a small fight scene where each punch and each hit is like a flash of like a painting, almost like Clockwork Orange. When he kills the cat lady, there's that painting. Some shots like that. Then there's like a long, stylized sex scene between him and Jane. Then it goes to black and white again. She's gone, but she calls him to meet at this theater, which is black and white also. And she talks about how the cops have already questioned her. They got to talk to her brother, Jerome, because he might know something. So then throughout most of the movie, they're looking for Jerome. And, because she said he didn't come home last night. So there's a long montage of them looking for Jerome, but also kind of acting like they're on a date and being playful. And we notice there's three other men kind of following them, one of which is a dwarf. He's going to go make a phone call to a friend, see if they can stay at his place while he's in the telephone booth. She gets pushed in the car and driven off. We know it's the guys that have been following them. But the friend he was talking to knows about Jerome, gives him an address to some model that he shoots that Jerome knows. So he goes to that address. Jerome is there. But then there's a phone call from Jane and her abductors saying, we need $10,000 at this place. No funny business. So this is when he starts to distrust Jane, because she said she didn't know where to find Jerome, but she was able to call him. So he takes Jerome with him. They go to look for him. They go by the racetrack where the dwarf works, but the black guy that was in the group is there. They get him to tell them where the dwarf is, which is this abandoned building by the cemetery. Which, when they get to that building, there's this cool shot where the door's in the middle. They're both standing on either side like this. But then in the middle, there's like this round, kind of like a James Bond shot with Bernard's face as he's looking through the doorway. So then when he finally turns to go in, the shot goes away. There is some neat stuff like that. They find Jane is tied up with the dwarf, who's getting a bit handsy. Other guys are there. Shootout, they save Jane. And then there's more crazy editing, like, usually when something violent happens, it goes into like this really gritty, scratchy Super 8 look, which I love. Also like road signs or it'll be like super letterboxed, like a little tiny box here or up here, or like split screen with nothing up top. And Brass did say he wanted to use shots like that to symbolize something. Like his example was, he won't show a horse, he'll show an eye. So it kind of makes sense, because there is a scene later with a light bulb where I get what he means. But so after they save Jane, they separate from Jerome. They're on the bus. He says, we need to go talk to Laris, who's Martha's lover. And I guess he's the boss of either the guys that were chasing them or Jelly Roll. She runs off, but then finds out she was playing because he did something similar earlier. So, and then this leads into a very long scene, because they get up to this movie theater, which has a poster for the movie Blow Up, which I guess was an influence on this film. They steal a car, I think it's Jelly Roll's car. It's convertible. So there's a chase. They're able to lose them because they get out, get in a taxi. And I mean, this chase goes on forever. Just eventually it ends up in the subway. And again, this could have been shortened by half, and it still would have been a decent length chase scene. And there's 2 long ass chase scenes. But eventually they get down to the subway, and they're like kneeling down behind this row of people. And then it shows this giant wall art where there's this couple sitting in a similar position at like an angle as to like where the camera is. Then it shows up close of Jane's eyes. Then it shows up close more wall art with this blonde woman. Actually, I think it's like a poster. This blonde woman holding up a book. And when it pans down, the spine says, "Can women kill?" And I was thinking, is that foreshadowing? Quite possibly. We'll find out. Which I'm not sure when to say spoilers, because this is such... I really think this movie's just more of an exercise in art, rather in editing, rather than, being a decent Giallo. Because, I mean, it is a Giallo, but the story is so... It feels like it takes a back seat to everything else. And the artistic angle is really the forefront. Because it really is generic. None of the revelations or twists really amount to anything. The ending is very anticlimactic. You can kind of see it coming after a while. You're not really surprised. And then, like, the final ending is just kind of okay. But I guess with that, I'll say spoilers. Can I recommend it? I mean, if you're into film, or if you're like a film student, definitely. Because this felt more like a student film that happened to be influenced by Giallo, which I know when I get to movies like A Mare, Strange Color of Your Body's Tears, Abracadabra, those ones are very, those ones are very artistic as well, and but those are also tribute or homage Giallos. I know certain people will review those and call them Gialli, but no, they're homage. But that's kind of like what this is, even though this is a legit Giallo, but it feels more like just an artistic experiment. So if you're more into just film and the kind of tricks that you can do with film, or if you're a film student, then sure. If you're a Giallo fan, maybe move it more towards the bottom of the list. But it's not because it's bad. I mean, it's just narratively there's not much to it. narratively and thematically, you can do a lot worse. I mean, just look at my playlist. But yeah, I can't. Not the most recommendable one. Here I am saying they should have cut a lot out of this movie, and my reviews can be forever. But yeah, not one of my favorites, but it was interesting to watch because of the editing. So with that, I'm gonna get into spoilers. So they make it on the subway, and they find out Jelly Roll and his guys have also made it on the subway. So he tells Jane they had to split up. He tells her to go back to David's, which is his friend's house that they're laying low in, who's also played by Stefano from Torso. He's gonna get off at the next stop and try to head him off, which leads to another log chase on foot, which ends up in a Greyhound racetrack. But when they finally catch up to him, they bring him to the first aid room, ironically, and they put him in this thing so he can't move. They beat him with the baton for a bit, which of course every time they hit him, there's like another flash of something, and then Jelly Roll comes up and he rips some eyelashes out. Which when he does that, there's like that crazy Super 8 frantic of editing. And he says, you better start talking by the time I'm done counting these. So he's like, you speak, you don't speak, you speak, you don't speak. And it keeps going back and forth between that and like this little tiny box down in the corner of like his mouth as he's smiling with nothing else here. And the shot of this flickering light bulb, all while in like that crackly, Super 8 film look. It kind of zooms in on Bernard and the light bulb to show he's getting an idea. That was sort of the symbolism that Brass was explaining that I mentioned earlier. Probably my favorite instance of that. And he says that Jane has it. Doesn't say her by name, but he says she has the diary. She's waiting downtown. They buy it. They take him to the car to take him to where she is. But then this cop car pulls out, and Jelly Roll tells the driver to pass him. And I don't know if it was just a bad pass and they wrecked, or if he was able to like grab him from the back seat and make them wreck. Couldn't really tell. But he runs off on foot. Does get back to David's. Then Jerome shows up, which at David's, because him and Bernard and Jane are laying in bed together. David goes into his dark room and he's like tweaking this TV in his dark room, and it shows them in bed and it has like TV audio even though they're talking. So it's like he has a camera set up to watch people while they're in the bedroom. One of the quirky Giallo character aspects. Which there was another thing earlier when they first get to David's. They're like dancing and playing around. And as they're dancing, it keeps showing the shot of someone cranking the radio, but it's just the same shot of him turning the knob up. Happens like 5 or 6 times. But anyway, after Jerome shows up, Bernard tells them they have to go talk to Martha. Oh, because also during the chase from the thugs at first, or at some point, Jane and Bernard, they end up where Laris is, and they find he's dead in his bathtub with a hole in his head. But Bernard finds a woman's earring on the floor. And it's already been mentioned that Martha is probably behind everything. But he doesn't say anything to Jane about the earring. So while Jerome is driving them to where Martha is, which is, he calls it a happening, which I always thought a happening was a public prank, but I guess it's a club. she tells Jerome that Laris has been killed. And then when they get to the club, this is another long ass scene. And this is the one that's like a time capsule. It's kind of like the opening scene in like Austin Powers, where it just looks like something out of the 60s with the clothes and the hair and everyone, but more grungy. More like where the teens hang out in like the first Ninja Turtles movie, like a grungy version of that. And it just goes on forever of just showing around this club and people walking around. Again, more that could have been cut out. But eventually, Bernard finds Martha, and he questions her, "Why'd you do it?" And she doesn't really say anything. He tells her about Laris's murder. She didn't even know about it. When he presents the earring, she says it's Jane's. It says, "I knew she was his lover," or something. Of course, he gets pissed, and he smashes a chair, which earlier in the film, like when I said, so now he starts to untrust her a little bit, because the guys had her call Jerome about the ransom, which she says the dwarf had the number and knew he was there, but he didn't really buy that. So it was like, yeah, the whole time he shouldn't have trusted her. And yeah, Jane was the killer, because while he's smashing the chair, cuts back and forth between that. It actually kind of superimposed also of him smashing the chair in silhouette. While it shows people in the club dancing, her posing, I think, for David, and also her bludgeoning Prescott the night he was murdered. So it cuts back between all those. But it doesn't go into why she did. I guess it was for revenge out of the blackmail Prescott was going to do of her father. But I don't think any diary or photograph was ever recovered or talked about. So, since there really was no explanation, I guess it had to be because of the blackmail that she mentioned at the very beginning. But they're outside, and it looks like they're at like a castle. But when he says, I don't care that you did it. I don't care what you've done. I guess implying I still love you and want to be with you. And she I think kind of blows him off, but then he presents the earring. He's like, "Oh, that's how it is." He says, "This is your earring." And he drops it and he says, "But I don't care what you've done." That's when she pulls out a gun, saying, "I can't, we can't do this," or whatever. He goes up and kisses her and says, "You can't do it. You can't shoot." Also, one of his quirks is that he always quotes some poet, like Lao Tse or someone. At one point, he quotes Mao Zedong. But then finally, she says something like, "It's not that I don't want to." He says, "Well, then go ahead and pull the trigger," and she does, and he falls and dies. She walks off, and it just ends on him dying. So I guess she gets away with it. And that's what I mean. It's very anticlimactic. You don't get the explanation. Not to say every movie needs the psycho ending, but with the Giallo, especially after 105, 107 minutes, where a lot of it is just chase scenes and showing around an area, could have had a little bit of an explanation. I mean, narratively, this movie's not very strong. Story-wise, this movie's not very strong. Visually, and the way it's edited, yeah, it's a very interesting movie. It is fun to watch for that. But it doesn't have the strong enough story, especially for a Giallo. It doesn't have a strong enough mystery or enough twists and turns or revelations to really keep you interested. if I wasn't super into Giallo, this might have been a movie I probably would have been really bored by very quick. But since I love Giallo and I'm doing this marathon, I had to stick through it. But yeah, the best thing about it is the editing and just some of the artistic angle of it. And that's why I feel like it was more of an artistic experiment than it just happened to be a Giallo because that's what was popular at the time, especially in Italy. Giallo was growing. It would have either been a Giallo or a spaghetti western. And I think Giallo was the better vehicle for this kind of style. But so yeah, not one of the best Giallo I've ever seen. It did remind me a lot of Death Laid an Egg. I thought it was actually from the same director, but it wasn't. But the two leads were in Death Laid an Egg. But and that one wasn't as eccentric in editing as this one was, but it was kind of similar. But even for the Pre-Argento era, before Giallo became very polished and became what we know Giallo to be, even in that era, it's not one of the best or the most interesting. But it's still worth checking out just for the editing and some of the cool shots that it has. But yeah, that's 1967's A Deadly Sweet. I do have a couple more Giallo to get to, a few more coming in orders. I do want to get back to anthologies for October. If that doesn't happen, I'll continue it at some point. But I am getting towards the end of the Giallo marathon. So whatever happens with October, we'll see. Maybe I'll do them concurrently. Like if I don't have any Giallo or Italian films to do at the time, but I have free time for videos, then I'll do anthologies. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, thank you for watching and stay tuned.